Women's Day, everyone! Woohoo! Welcome to the first gathering of the Progressive Democrats of Benicia Women's Caucus. So I've got a few announcements I need to make, sort of logistical things. We have a really, really loaded agenda tonight, and I'm standing in front of our esteemed guests. So this is going to be an abbreviated Progressive Democrats meeting. Monica Brown is our Delano County Supervisor, District 2, and she actually has an important announcement to make right now as well.
Welcome, everybody, to the International Day of the Woman. I have a proclamation. I'm only reading 2 whereases, so hang in there. So, whereas celebrating International Women's Day means that the Delano County reaffirms its commitment to end discrimination and violence against women and girls, and ensure their safety and welfare, pursue policies that guarantee the basic human rights of women and girls, and promote women's participation in every aspect of society and community. And whereas the world has witnessed a significance in both society's thoughts about women's equality. However, the fact is that women are still not paid equal to that of their male counterparts. Women still are not present in equal numbers in business or politics, and globally, women still do not have access to education, health, and more women are killed worldwide because of their gender. Whereas the theme of this year's International Women's Day is Balance for Better, and Delano County continues to strive to build a gender-balanced world. So this is my proclamation. I'm going to be passing it over to our MC, but we have to keep working on it. I'm enlightened that we have a lot of men here, but ladies, we got to vote, and we got to make sure that we're working.
And now I'd like to introduce Kari Birdseye, our moderator for this evening.
It is so wonderful to see so many people out for this event this evening. We are so heartened to see so many friendly faces that we know, a lot of folks that we don't know, and we really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule Friday night to celebrate International Women's Day with us. One elected that we have not mentioned yet is at the state level. The Honorable State Controller Betty T. Yee is going to be on our... We had to make sure that we formally introduced all the electeds. But another elected that's really important to what happens here in Benicia is our mayor, and she's going to give some opening remarks. Mayor Elizabeth Patterson.
Well, I want to thank all of you. It's really great to see all of you here. Many faces I recognize and some new faces. This is really very rewarding. And I want to thank Kari and Maggie and Phyllis and Ralph for doing all the hard work that makes something like this happen. Now, I was very prepared today, and I wrote all my remarks on about 3 3x5 cards out of my little stack of 3x5 cards. And I left the remarks that I had written at home. So I have 1 3x5 card. My goal tonight is to have you, women, leave here tonight committed to applying for a commission, a board, running for office, or working on a campaign. That's my goal, so don't disappoint me. One of the reasons that we don't have as many women on some of our boards and commissions, a couple of them are natural subject areas like human services and arts and culture. But we have many others, and they contribute a great deal to our community. And the reason that we don't have a majority of women on the city council is not because they can't get elected, it's because they don't run. So, and they don't apply. And I work really hard to recruit women to our boards and commissions. And so please apply, and please run, and please work on a campaign. I often get asked a pretty basic question about how did you get interested in politics? Why did you run? And often I hear, and why do you keep doing it? Because it seems kind of hard. And I've thought a lot about that. And so all of you who know me know I'm really, really serious. And I do have a sense of humor, but I am really serious because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, and I've always been that way. And that's, so you get what I've always been as a person. But I thought a lot about the question, and I realized that maybe I could tell a story, and that would help explain all of that. So I was just asked by Steve, actually, where I was born. I was born in Los Angeles. My mother was born in Los Angeles. And her mother died when she was a teenager, and she went to live with her aunts, my great-aunts. J.C. Patterson was the executive officer for a very prestigious law firm in Los Angeles on 1 Wilshire, Farron & Farron. And my other great-aunt, Margaret, was a controller for Ambassador Hotel. Pause. How many of you even know about the Ambassador Hotel? Okay, cool. And so then my father left my mother and 2 small children, and so my mother had to work and didn't make a lot of money, lived in a house behind a house in Highland Park, and I watched her go to work and replace batteries in cars and paint the house and keep us clean and off to school, and then my great aunts, and they're working. So our conversation was about working, was kind of interesting. Some of them traveled and so forth. And I was growing up with that influence. So 3 women who were working in very interesting careers. When I was about whatever the appropriate age was for applying for a paper route, I just went in, I can do a paper route. And I was told, no, you can't because you're a girl. I was pretty mad. Now, I haven't been mad forever, but it has been kind of a motivation for me. And so I thought, because I had this influence of these women, I really didn't feel shrinking away from some of these challenges was necessary. I just kept meeting the challenges. And there are many challenges that a woman has at my age through life to get to where one can go. And the reason I have pursued that path is because of the passion I have for making the world a better place. For children, for women, for our community, and for our environment. And we are under dire conditions and threats these days with climate change. Now, I also don't have animus toward men, so you guys can relax. But I have a lot of grievances. And one of the grievances is entitlement. And so I've sort of have dealt with that. That's another experience I've had. I could go on for a really long time. We could book this for a couple of days, I think. And I've learned a lot. It's made me better at what I'm doing and what have you. But when you think about that, when we shut out 50% of our human capital, that's not helping us make the world a better place. And I love women human capital. They're great at inclusiveness, they're great at sharing, they're great at finding common ground. They're really great at trying to move forward for the community, for the children, and for the world. So, women, you're my people.
Thank you so much, Mayor Patterson. That's a great way to kick this evening off. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Kari Birdseye. I am a Progressive Democrat of Benicia, and I am chair of their Women's Caucus group. And this is our very first event of our Women's Caucus group. So, yes, let's say, and our plan is to do events quarterly, and I couldn't think of a better way to kick off our series. So it's a really special day, International Women's Day, March 8th. It's celebrated globally, celebrating the social economic and cultural, political achievements of women. The day also marks a call to action for accelerating gender parity. So it's been around for a while. The first Women's Day was actually a socialist holiday, and it began in 1911. And many European countries celebrated it, a way to really acknowledge the importance of their women to their economies, to their families, to the growth of their nations. It wasn't until 1975 that the UN officially recognized it as International Women's Day. And since then, they've encouraged more and more countries around the world to embrace the holiday and its goal of celebrating, quote, acts of courage and determination by ordinary women who have played an extraordinary role in the history of their countries and communities. Anyone keeping tabs on women in politics these days know that we have many women in leadership that are demonstrating acts of courage and determination daily. This distinguished panel we have with us today fits that bill as well. We have invited these women who span political experience levels in hopes of inspiring all of us, local women of Benicia, Vallejo, and our neighboring communities. What we wish to inspire is to become more politically active and more engaged in our communities. We'll explore the importance of our voices to the political process, outcomes, and our future. And looking around this room, we have women who have been involved at the local level for 50 years. We have women, fierce women activists in this room. And we have new, fresh faces, too. And so it's an opportunity for all of us to learn from each other and be inspired. So let's get the discussion started. I will briefly introduce our panelists and keep it short because their impressive biographies are actually printed out on the table in front of Kathy there. So if you want to know more about our panelists and read about them, pick that up. And then I'll ask a few questions to get things started, and then we'll open up the discussion for questions from the audience. I am very honored to introduce our California State Controller, Betty T. Lee. She was elected in 2014 following 2 terms of service on the California Board of Equalization. As Controller, she continues to serve on that board as its 5th voting member. Re-elected for a 2nd term as Controller in 2018, Ms. Yee is only the 10th woman in California history to be elected to statewide office. Welcome, Ms. Yee. Sitting next to Controller Yee is Susannah Delano. She's the Executive Director of Close the Gap California, an organization that recruits talented progressive women to run and win seats in the California legislature. Susannah has worked for over 15 years to promote the good health and empowerment of women and challenged communities throughout California. Welcome, Susannah. Sitting next to Susannah is Cora Young. Cora works as District Veterans Liaison and Field Representative for our Congressman, U.S. Congressman Mike Thompson. Cora communicates and collaborates with local staff to assist and track issues of concern for his constituents and is responsible for the coordination of the members' in-district schedule. And that is a busy job. Welcome, Cora. And sitting next to me is Linda Escalante. She is a renowned environmental expert in the U.S.-based Spanish language community. She empowers and mobilizes Latinos to engage in advocacy and activism around environmental and health issues. She has been bestowed the Latino Magazine News Generation Award and named among Podar Magazine 100 U.S. Green Latino Leaders. Welcome, Linda. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and then we'll just I'll ask a question, and then we'll pass the mic across. So the first question is to get to know you guys a little bit better, and that is, what motivated you to get politically motivated? Was it an event, or what happened, and what age? We'll start with Ms. Yee.
Thank you very much, Kari. Good evening, everyone. And first of all, let me just say it's really wonderful to be here, and it's just great to see this kind of turn out, and it's just feels like we're supposed to be here tonight, right, on International Women's Day. So thank you for being here. Secondly, I hope you all call me Betty. The Betty T was because I went to school with like 4 other Betty Yees, and I got the bad report card by mistake one year, so I use the middle initial now. But my political journey was not something planned, and I like to tell this story because I hope it is one that can be the beginning of the journey for many others. And that is, it really began being an advocate for my parents who were immigrants. I am the second oldest of 6 children to immigrant parents from China, and who didn't speak English very well, but had a laundry and dry cleaning business in San Francisco for the better part of 30 years to raise their 6 children. And when you have a family business, and certainly immigrants starting to get a foothold in their communities here, of course the best employees are the children. And I still say it's the best job I ever had. At that time, growing up, I learned a lot about how to interact with customers. I remember counting back change before we had calculators and all kinds of things to help us do that. But more importantly, I grew up at a time when we really felt supported. My parents felt very supported in the west side of San Francisco. We were among European descendants, Middle Eastern descendants, and it was a time where I learned a lot about what community meant. And that it was a value that really stuck with me in terms of when anyone was in need in our community, we all rallied behind that family or that household because it was a stain on the entire community if we didn't do that. And so at the age of 13, I actually was tasked by the 4 Chinese American families in the neighborhood to appear before the local school board town hall meeting. It was my little sister was going to be in the first class of the school busing program. And it wasn't because we opposed the busing program, but logistically, the 4 Chinese American families had businesses to run. They were open 7 days a week, and the local elementary school was within walking distance from the business. None of the families had cars, didn't drive, and we were concerned that if anything happened to the children in case of an emergency, that not only would the families have to shut down the business, but they would be on public transportation for well over 2 hours to pick up their children and bring them home. So I was tasked at the age of 13 to speak to the local school board to essentially deliver a message, and I'm glad I'm sitting down because every time I tell this story I can remember my knees shaking, speaking before the school board, that it was to essentially say to them, we don't oppose the goals of the busing program, but we don't want anything to happen to our children where we can't get to them in the case of an emergency. And would you please consider using the funding for the busing program to improve the quality of all of the schools across the city? I remember that statement. I went back to my seat, and the busing program lasted the better part of the next 3 decades. And it was all fine. My sisters were fine. It was all fine. But that experience left an impression on me that I was a voice for someone. And I still have, without any rose-colored glasses on, this notion that politics is for really achieving good, and that it is about having the diverse array of voices around the table so that we can actually be intentional and purposeful in terms of trying to just really embrace the challenges that we have so much that we're dealing with today, that if we have the diverse array of voices, that the solutions that we're going to come up with are really going to have impact. And I just believe that still to my core today. And so much of what I learned as a young child just carried with me that, and I'm sure each of you in your own lives and your own personal journeys can think about a time in your life when you stood up for someone. And I think that's some of the most noblest things that we can be, is just advocates for each other and just supporters of each other. And it's my orientation to how I serve, continuing today. So And I was 13. The politics it wasn't really about politics. It was really about how do we continue to be a community and to support one another. And I feel like minding the store for my parents' dry cleaning business and laundry business just has really been a foundational aspect of my life that now I have the great privilege of minding the store for the great state of California as your controller.
Well, my story, I would say, starts around age 14, and I often say I think whatever you're doing at age 14 really imprints on you, and if you look at your life and trace it back to what was going on at that time, you'll see a connection there. When I was 14, I was lucky enough to travel with a group of, I think, about 12 women to South Africa. We ranged in age from 14 to 82, I believe, or maybe 80. I'm looking at my mom here because she was along with me. Hi, Mom. And it was a group of women that were involved with liberal or progressive churches, and we met with women across various racial groups, various class groups all around the country during that time about what their experience had been like fighting back against apartheid. When we went, it was during that brief period where apartheid had officially ended. Nelson Mandela was freed from jail, but he had not yet been elected president. So it was a very dynamic, unstable time. There was a lot of violence. I met with kids my own age, as well as older people. And I think learning the story of South Africa at that time for me gave me the outrage that really fueled my desire for justice. I was raised in a social justice family, but I think that for me gave me the lens to really see against the backdrop of what came in the years after that, the change that is possible when people organize and when they stand up to injustice generation after generation. So far less interesting, but just as important, is the story of how I became activated, which I tend to think everyone has one of those stories as well. South Africa for me was an awakening to injustice and the fire in my belly, the commitment to movement building that I've had my entire life. But it wasn't really until I got to college and I was studying philosophy and theory, and I was, I was arguably not a very practical person. But I decided to major in women's studies, gender studies, and the group of us of about 8 women who were majoring in that realized that there was not a whole lot of institutional investment in the major. There was not dedicated professors, there was not a whole lot of infrastructure, and we got pissed off. And we decided to fight back, and we got together and organized, and it was very organic, and I think despite being raised in a family that has been organizing their entire lives, I didn't realize what was happening until I had written a 20-page manifesto. And importantly, I really saw and felt my role in that. I felt compelled to do this. I saw my path, and we'll talk more about this later, but I think that's really what I enjoy about working at Close the Gap, is that it's that helping people to see their path and what role they can play.
First, I want to say how incredibly humbled and honored I am to be included amongst this panel of esteemed women and have so many people come out in the community from Benicia to hear us talk on a Friday night. It's incredibly humbling. My story also starts around age 15. My father, and I'm sure he's going to correct me here, was the director of Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment. Close enough, okay. For as long as I can remember being a kid. And, he's 6'4", and I was like 4 foot high. And I remember him taking me into the office and reading, he'd hand me a binder and a highlighter, and he said, now highlight every sentence that has the word lamppost in it. And so I would go through and read through, I'm guessing they were probably some kind of EIR or city planning documents, looking for lamppost and highlighting it for him. And that kind of kick-started me into government. Some would say sadly. My father was among those. My entire career in college, I seemed to get a phone call maybe once every year, every other year. Are you sure you want to be a politics major? Are you sure you want to do American politics and government as your major? It's not a very fruitful major. Don't you think math or science would be easier or better or more fruitful for your career? Probably, but here we are. And I think my real political motivation for getting involved in the government and working for the people and doing the people's work, as my boss likes to call it, it was when I was 15 years old. There was a young boy in Southern California who hung himself for being bullied for being gay, and he was only 13. and I was 15, and I had just gotten my head on straight. I had just started to understand, social circles and cliques and bullying and, how you treat other people matters. And so having something like that happen to me, or to someone to me, so close to my age, was very powerful. And I was moved by the fact that he felt as though no one stood up for him and he had no one to go to. And ever since then, I just started getting involved in my school's LGBTQ program. In college, I became a peer-to-peer counselor for victims of rape and sexual assault, and stuck with my major, and here we are today.
So it's good to be last because I can borrow from everyone here. First is I was a biology major, and look where I ended up, the same place. So I think your dad was wrong. So my story is actually and it's an incredible honor to be at this table with you, especially Betty, because it's a similar story. I'm from Los Angeles, but I'm also an immigrant. I moved to the United States when I was 10 years old, and my experience was very similar. My family obviously was not, focused on politics, although I do come from a family who either, divides their attention between being political spectators or soccer spectators. So they like to talk about politics at home, but, they were kind of busy trying to survive, and I ended up that was sort of my first experience in kind of getting out in the world and having to be the health advocate for my family, the immigration advocate for my family, when I was super, super young, when I was around 13 as well. So obviously opening my eyes at that young age to kind of these realities, including, how to manage your finances and how to be your family's translator. You get exposed to the fact that, your life is very much affected by the powers that be, that sometimes are much greater than us. And, when you come from a low-income family and you try to just focus on putting food on the table, you feel quite impotent, right? So when I was in high school, I was a good student, and I was surrounded by some very high-achieving kids. And I was undocumented, but I thought, well, somehow I'll get to college. And this was before the Dreamers got DACA and everything, so there was just, no chance that I was going to be able to go to college if nothing changed in my status. But I still kind of stuck around, and I figured, well, I'll do well in school, and I'll do ASB, and I'll be the vice president. Why not? I'll just run for office. I'll just show them I can do this, And I ended up, when I was a senior, I ended up being the school's representative to the school board, and that was kind of my first experience in leadership and kind of touching politics. When I went to study biology, then I was like, I'm just going to be a doctor, forget about any of this. But life just kind of ends up, putting you in the places where both your experience, your background, your character, it just kind of ends up shifting you and putting you in these places. And now I have, I think as an adult, when the May 5th march, and my son was already born at the time, the immigration march in Los Angeles, there was over 1 million people that came out. I think that was sort of, once my son was born, like that fire reignited very powerfully, It was like this lioness was just like, I was ready to roar, out there in the world. And that was we took to the streets, and from that point on, I think I kind of just said, well, this is the way you're able to influence and fix a lot of those injustices and those problems that, create these barriers for folks in my community in particular to be able to, get to these places. And now I have been working for the natural resources for a long time. That's my day job. But I share, and this is just a disclaimer, but I'm an alternate on the Coastal Commission as well. And that's been the latest step. You're an advocate, you've been fighting, throwing bombs from one corner, and then you're like, well, step up, go to the other side and try to make those decisions. And that's been very empowering and very powerful as well. It's scary, of course. All this are decisions that impact millions of people. But at the same time, I think what I've learned from this journey has been that, my compass, and I figure this is your case as well when you're making decisions like that. All of this life that we've lived and all of these experiences, and that is your compass when you're making those decisions. And I think that's why it's so important to have, women at the table, because we bring that with us. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, I'm pretty sure everybody in this room knows that we have more women in office than ever before throughout the country, at the federal level, at the state and local level. My question to you is, panelists, is why is it important to become and stay involved and do what the mayor asks our Benicians to do, step up and get involved, be on commissions, get involved in local campaigns? How is that important?
More women have been elected this year than ever before. Absolutely. It's an amazing phenomenon. And I started working for Congressman Thompson in the Obama administration. And it was a very even-tide ship. We were going about doing the people's work, working with constituents, passing legislation, and holding hearings. And then that changed. And things tended to slow down in D.C. Not the news cycle, though. That was constant and ever rotating, and still is to this day. But do I think it's a boomerang effect? No. I think that this has been a long time coming. It just took something so drastic to encourage a lot of women to step up and believe that maybe I am the best option. Maybe the choices we have aren't the best, and we could use some alternatives. I don't necessarily think it's just about getting women to run, though. It's about staying around. Find your niche. Get involved. If senior issues are your passion, get involved. Join your senior coalition. Advocate for them. We'll all be there one day. If it's teens, go volunteer at your local teen center. Some of us are, meant to run and be elected and maybe write legislation or pass policy or hold hearings, but not all of us, and that's okay. It's getting involved on your local level and staying involved, making sure you're actually acting on what's passionate for you, because if you enjoy doing it, you're going to keep doing it, and I think that's the most important.
All right. Thank you, Cora. So I think harking back a number of months to the confirmation hearings for Judge Kavanaugh, I know some of us would like to forget that particular period of time, but I think it was a real inflection point for people to see just how out of balance our elected leadership is with the people who are living on the ground every day. And it was an interesting moment for us within the women's political circles, comparing it, of course, to 1991 when Anita Hill testified to an all-white male Senate Judiciary Committee. Fast forward around 20 years later, and you have a number of women, a multiracial group of women, most of whom were elected in the wave year of the woman of 1992, which followed Anita Hill, and the similarities don't end there. So, as a group, we got together and really noted that this is progress. It's important that during that testimony, it was not the same makeup of the committee, but we have so much further to go. And so I think for women in particular, when women are not at the table, when people of color are not at the table, when LGBTQI people are not at the table, it's not just that those perspectives are not represented, it's that we don't have the full spectrum of the needs before us in front of a body. In Sacramento, for example, within the California State Legislature, just last year there were not even enough women members to sit on every key committee of our state legislature here in liberal California. So thankfully, the election results of 2018 bumped us up 10 percentage points. We're at 30% women now in the state legislature, and we want to get all the way to 50%. We think we can. But, when you look at the lived experience, traditionally, a lot of times women are the ones doing childcare. Women are the ones accessing reproductive health care. Women are often the ones doing end-of-life care, and I know that's not always the case, and I want to recognize everyone doing that hard work, but those are policy areas that are legislated every single day, and if we don't have the people who are actually doing that work present at the table where those decisions are made or in the pipeline at these local appointment levels to get up to that level, then we're missing a huge opportunity to address critical issues of our time. I mean, I don't know how to solve climate change. I don't know how to solve gun violence. I don't know how to solve a lot of the problems that we're all outraged and beset by every day. But I can tell you one thing, we're not going to fix them without a real representation of the people living those problems every day on the ground at the table.
All very true, for sure. And I mean, all I guess I can add is my reaction to the question, which was that this has been a long and overdue correction of history, from the disenfranchisement of women, still to this day. So I was delighted to see this historical election with the representation of women and women of color. So I thought it was incredible that there hadn't been a Native American representative, which is fantastic. And I see it as sort of, I mean, this whole situation that we're going through, I always kind of try to see the silver lining, because it's, I work on climate change, so you can't, that's pretty, dire stuff every day. But what I see is sort of this like social reaction to right this wrongs, to correct our path and get to the next level of our evolution. And there comes my biology training. But I think in order for us to sort of meet the challenges head on and to actually find some transformative solutions to fix a lot of this existential problems that we have, this disparity of representation of women in government in particular is I think is part of the problem. So we're moving obviously towards that solution, and hopefully this will just encourage more and more women to run for it. Not run away from it, run towards it.
Let me just add maybe a different lens to what happened in this last election. While we had record numbers of women who ran, and certainly record numbers who won, just slightly over 50% of the women who ran did not win. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to be sure that they don't wander far, because we actually have a cadre of women who are now experienced in campaigning, who know really how to probably mentor other women who are ready to run, who may be part of the infrastructure that we need politically to support women who run. And so I just think this whole time that we have right now is such an opportunity to really build that infrastructure for how we're going to get the next 20 women elected and how we're going to get to parity at all levels of government, and I mean all levels. And it's been heartening to see that for many of the women who lost here in California, they're staying involved. We have a new gubernatorial administration, and they're looking at appointments, and they're looking to join a commission. But the thing that I would say about the urgency of this would be this. Everything I do as your controller is through the lens of the economy. And to me, and Linda, I appreciate your work on climate change, and I just have to do a shout out to the Coastal Commission, but they just approved an environmental justice policy that has been a long time coming with respect to being sure that all of our communities are really have a voice on coastal issues, and that's not been the case in the history of California, and it was really a milestone in terms of that work, so congratulations on that. But it's that, when we look at the economy, this is where women have not been represented. And, it's not a coincidence that there's a woman as your CFO in California. And my goal really is to figure out how do we get full participation of women and equal participation of women in our economy. And when you look at what's happening with the economy, women have been left behind. And yet at the same time, we have these changes, whether it be climate change or just the changing nature of our economy and how work is now, productivity is now more driven by technological innovations and AI and robotics that have the potential of displacing even more workers. I mean, we're at a critical juncture right now in terms of whether we're going to see more communities left behind or whether we're going to really have policies that will be more inclusive, that will deal with issues of equity, and that will look at really having a different kind of conversation about what we do with our resources. And how we deploy technology, and how we look at reimagining work and reallocating work so that there are no communities that are left behind. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, and unfortunately have the highest effective rate of poverty in the United States. those are the bookends within which I do my work. And the voices of women are critical to this, because it is women who are at the service sector levels of work that are barely making ends meet, who are suffering the most from the affordability crisis in this state. And as Suzanne said, they have to be at the table, because if they're not, the solutions that we're going to come up with aren't going to be impactful to them and aren't going to necessarily move the needle for them. And so this is really what this is all about. It's not just for elevating the numbers of women and getting to 50+1, but it really is about what are we going to deliver with respect to improving society, frankly, protecting our democracy, because it's only as strong as the ability of each of us to fully participate in it.
Okay, I'm going to throw a little factoid at you now. So, new research in Harvard Business Review finds that while both men and women benefit from having a network of well-connected peers across different groups, women who also have an inner circle of close female contacts are more likely to land executive and high-level political positions with greater authority, a higher pay, and while there's no similar link found for men. So that to me suggests that women supporting women is crucial in women leading. And so let's talk about the power of the pack and how that has shaped who you are and how you lead. Linda, do you want to start?
Well, I am the product of a pack of women, so you can blame them if you want. Yeah, I mean, it was my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, who were sort of my core safety net. That was my team, and then throughout my life and my career in particular, I mean, the mentors that have had the most positive and significant impact, that have uplifted me, have literally said, here's my spot, you take it so that you can gain this experience and you can start, polishing your chops, has been women. I mean, I wouldn't be here without that kind of support. And I find it, very comforting to see more and more women in these positions, but obviously, I think we definitely do need to at least get to 50% because, as the saying goes, if you're not sitting at the table, you are an item on the menu, right? So, it's very important to have that kind of relationship, that kind of mentorship too.
So, why is it important for women to support other women? And I just have to point out that I believe I'm the baby on the panel. I'm only 24, so just FYI. My fellow panelists asked me where I was before working for Congressman Thompson, and I had to reply I was at college. But why is it important for women to support other women? I recently, when watching the Hillary Clinton campaign, had so many conversations with some of my very progressive fellow alumni from my small liberal arts university, who were insistent that she had aged past her prime, that she couldn't handle the job, and she wasn't fit for the position. I think a lot of that had to do with gender bias. I believe that people seem to, or tend to, discredit women who are sitting at the table, even if they are sitting at the table. Not only do you have to fight for a place to sit, you need to fight to be heard and recognized and respected. And so having that conversation with those fellow alumni about the Bernie versus Hillary race, I had to point out her experience and her resume in comparison, and that was not a conversation they wanted to have. So I always had to reframe the question to take away the aspect of gender. It's not about what you think she can do, let's look at what she did. And so I believe that it's always important to remove that lens and make sure that you're judging someone on their capacity, their capability, what they've done, what they plan to do, what they say they're going to do, and not just what you believe to be true based on what you see.
So women should support other women because if they don't, no one might there are just countless opportunities that people in privileged positions receive that they don't even realize that they're receiving. And a lot of times women are on the opposite side of that. And I think that's, one thing we try to do at Close the Gap is really peel back the curtain on the insider world of Sacramento and how you actually win a seat in the state legislature. The rules that no one will tell you, the rules that aren't written, that kind of inside-outside dynamic is something that I really personally enjoy. And I think makes a big difference in the kinds of candidates that are able to come through that system. I hear just anecdotally from a lot of women candidates trying to get their campaigns off the ground that they're so frustrated with the speed of donations. A lot of times if a man announces he's granted a certain estimation of viability that a woman with the same background and the same experience might not have. And people are quick to throw in their support financially, whereas a woman has to prove more or show more or dispel more rumors or whatever it is. So I think we're all fairly familiar with those dynamics. But I think the other thing to point out here is this moment that we're in of the resistance, which I know a lot of you play a role in, and it's very multifaceted. Women are really at the core of that. And women always have been in terms of movements, especially women of color. But, I've read statistics when we defeated the ACA rollback last year, it was as many as 85% of the calls going into the White House were made by women. Women are organizing the heck out of 2019 already, and they're going to keep on doing that. And I think that's part of the way we're supporting each other. And I think, this historic wave of, the number of women that ran for office last year, the number of women that won for office last year, that's not a total coincidence either. There's a huge spike in groups like Emerge California, training women to run, Close the Gap California here more locally, Run for Something, there's Swing Left, there's just a lot of groups and investment in infrastructure. The tech community has really rallied around attracting non-traditional candidates, which we hope will become the new tradition. Donors have stepped up. Grassroots activists have stepped up, and I think we should recognize that rightfully as women supporting women, or part of that story, and keep that going.
It is essential that women support women. But what does that support really mean? Obviously, if we have a candidate, it's about perhaps writing a check or volunteering on a campaign. But it's also mentorship, and I have had the opportunity to mentor a number of women running for office, and sometimes the best way to mentor is just to be brutally honest about what it's going to take to win. And some of the training programs that are available for women now really do help candidates, get to some of those core issues about what it means running a campaign. The fact of the matter is, when you're running a campaign, for many women, they can't afford to take the time off or to be away from family to run a full-time campaign. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of women don't run. It is a sacrifice of time, and it requires a lot of support, and when that support isn't there, they pretty much just put that decision aside. But I think really honest mentorship, I think, is really critical. When I first ran for office, my political mentor is a woman who's now out of politics, but I really felt qualified to do this work. It's been my career for 35 years in the world of finance and tax. I had no shortage of advice about how to run for office, but I just made a commitment to myself that when I ran, that I was not going to lose myself, that this wasn't a teenage dream of mine. I have all kinds of interests in life, and so I was going to run to win, and it's a great privilege to serve. But I knew that when I won that I had to really do my part in terms of how I was going to bring other women into the fold. And I have a great senior staff who are majority women in areas that are non-traditionally represented by women. My chief of staff is a woman. My deputy controller for taxation is a woman. My deputy controller for investments is a woman. My deputy controller for environmental policy is a woman, and on and on and on. But this is where I think, for women who ascend in leadership, we have to think about all the ways that we can continue to support women, and this is definitely one of the ways that has been such a big part of my success being in public office, and that is to help really elevate the careers and aspirations of so many women who just have not been able to get beyond a foot in the door. So it's a great privilege to see that talent continue as well. The other thing I will say about support is, there's support, and I think there's the element of sisterhood. And I think this is changing now because of the whole diversity of women who are running. But there was a time, and the statistic was cited, that I'm only the 10th woman since statehood to be in a statewide constitutional office. Terrible statistic, terrible. But where I didn't have a lot of mentors that I could seek in terms of what this was going to be like. And frankly, the people who were in higher office, who were women, weren't willing to share some of that. There was a lot of competition, right, in terms of who was going to have more power, which was ridiculous to me, because power to me is about delivering results. And so I think that's changing now, because we're all just seeing the criticality of having, the diverse voices at the table, just the urgency of so many of these issues that we have to tend to that affect the lives of so many Californians. And more importantly, I think there is a sisterhood that is starting to develop by just looking at how so many of the issues that we are seeing, and this is really what I appreciate about the movement, to really talk about the intersectionality of issues. That when you're not looking at creating silos and going down kind of single-dimensional lanes about how we're going to solve our issues, you really begin to build movements and build communities pretty quickly, because we all share similar concerns. And when we can have those intersectional voices at the table, I'm just really confident that we can really move the needle on so much that we have to do here in California.
Okay, so this going off script a little bit, guys. What is the favorite part of your job, and how does that part of your job advance other women? Do you need 30 seconds? I gave them kind of a heads up on some of the questions. This is a new one, but I think you guys have alluded to it a little bit. I just wanted to draw that out a little bit. Former journalist, I have to follow up on these things.
So when I mentioned that I was the baby on the panel, I meant to imply that I'm pulling from my 3 whole years of experience. But the next question you had scripted for us was, why is it important to stay in office? And to me, my answer kind of falls in the same vein as to what is my favorite part of my job. The biggest part of my job is constituent services, working one-on-one with people who have issues with federal agencies, be that with the individual, the organization, on behalf of the city and municipality, and doing that work and navigating people through the vast bureaucracy that is our federal government has been a frustrating but rewarding task to complete. So often there are folks that don't know the benefits or services that they could potentially access through the federal government that are available to them. And being able to show them just the capacity that our federal government has to this day is something that is always eye-opening for me and for them. And so it is my favorite part of my job. But I also find it to be the reason why I want to stay involved. A lot of the folks I work with are hesitant to believe or have faith in the government. And that is, to me, very sad, because there are so many things, and the government is, at this time, so far-reaching, that can be done to assist you in your everyday life, in your community, in your society. But folks are reluctant to reach out or put faith in a system that has failed them before. So to me, it's one of my favorite parts of my job, and one of the reasons why I believe it's still important to stick with it.
The thing I love about my job is, we go out, we target districts that we think a progressive woman could win. It's either an open district or a district that is held by a Republican but is starting to turn purple or even blue. So I get to go to where the action is. We go out, if we don't have a list already, and find people that are doing extraordinary things in communities. And so, I get to have thoughts like, wow, there really aren't a lot of people with tech expertise serving in the state legislature. Let me triangulate where women in tech are leading and doing interesting things and see if I can get some meetings with them. And then even if they don't end up running, I get to have very interesting meetings and learn more about those issue areas. So that piece is exciting, but I think ultimately it goes back to what Betty closed with. on the last question, which is the impact that the policies will make. I've only been at Close the Gap for about a year. I was at Planned Parenthood working on advocacy and policy for the better part of the 2010s. Before that, in the 2000s, I was with SEIU working with in-home caregivers who took care of low-income elderly and disabled people. And I'm seeing a former colleague from that time. And, you know, I was always in charge of some kind of political program, and I'd have to write a political plan, and it would be, you know, a 5-part plan. And the last part of the plan was always recruit candidate. Like, that was the dream, is that we actually had the bandwidth to go out and find the people who had lived the issues that our members had lived, or that our constituents or our patients had lived, and really understood and committed to it as a priority. And guess what? We never got there because we were too busy fighting defense. So to me, working with Close the Gap right now feels like the ability to be on offense in terms of getting up under a campaign 2 years before it starts, before it hits the news waves. And really assess a community and work with them to find out what's bubbling and what's hot and who's connected and who's really known on the ground for being a leader.
Hands down, the favorite part of my job is really every day recognizing the tremendous potential of this great state of California, not only leading the nation, but the rest of the world. And as your controller, I have a seat on over 70 different boards and commissions, and I have really able staff who do a lot of that work. But where I have spent a good deal of my time during my first 4 years as controller is really through the capacity of my service on both public pension funds, dealing with climate change on a very global level, and working with other investors around the world, about 250 of them, that represent about $32 trillion of assets under management, going after the top 100 polluters in the world. And really to put them to task with respect to how they're going to change their operation, how they're going to recognize climate risk as a business risk, and what they're going to do in terms of their part to keep the warming of our planet well below 2 degrees Celsius, the goal of the Paris Accord. So that is, you know, kind of at the global level, but then also when I look at what can happen at the local level and certainly in the state level, the independence of the office and certainly serving on bodies like the State Lands Commission, and Linda will appreciate this. It seems like such an insignificant thing, but I'm always looking for those opportunities of where we can just make a mark that will hopefully generate additional action. But I was responsible for the early and preemptive shutdown of the last state oil platform in the Santa Barbara Channel. And the reason we decided to do that was because, frankly, the oil companies just were putting us over a barrel, essentially, right? No pun intended. But essentially threatening that, we would lose revenues, but we also know the harm that having, oil certainly along our central coast has had. So to do that preemptively, that's now really had our staff at the State Lands Commission enter into new skill sets that they didn't know they had in terms of how to manage oil platform assets, but it was essential to do, and we're very proud of the progress that we're making in terms of shutting that down, and obviously playing defense against this Trump administration for even thinking about any additional exploration or drilling. But a fun thing, there's no day that is 2 days that are the same in my job. But one of the fun things that I like to say, because to me it really represented something that I hope will be the beginning of something much greater. We all have known about pay equity issues with respect to women in sports. And the Coastal Commission, some of you have heard about the Mavericks surfing competition along the San Mateo coast. The event sponsors need to get a permit from the Coastal Commission and a lease from the State Lands Commission. And the Coastal Commission really insisted, as a condition of the permit, that they also have women equally participating in the competition. And when the issue came before the State Lands Commission, that wasn't enough. We need women to be paid. These are competitive women surfers who take a beating. They've been training. There have been generations of women who have been doing this. And I don't know if you've read the New York Times article a few weeks ago. It was a phenomenal article. If you haven't read it, New York Times Magazine about 2 weeks ago about women in competitive surfing. This is some badass, courageous stuff that they're doing. But it is, surfing became the official sport of California last August. Governor Jerry Brown signed the bill. And right after that, the issue came before the State Lands Commission, and we had told the organizers, the condition of your lease will mean that women have to be paid equal prize money. And we got so much pushback from the organizers because they said, well, that can't happen this year, this next competition. And frankly, I think they could have gamed it to just say, well, we're not going to have the competition this year because the waves aren't really, kind of conducive to the competition. And we don't have the sponsorship. We can't really match, kind of the prize money that we've been paying out. And how can we do equal prize money? I said, it's very simple. You just add the number of men and women who are competing and divide the purse by that number, and you get equal prize money. And I will bet you that you will have sponsors just wanting to step up when you do that. And so the organizers thought twice about that, and they did come back in as a condition of the lease and agreed to equal prize money for competitors in the Maverick surfing competition. So. And the reason that's important is because I think at all levels of government, and I hope those who are serving, I know the mayor looks at this, but there are those opportunities where it may not make a huge difference, but on this, when we have been talking for so long, I mean, this is like 45 years plus after Title IX, and this is where we are. So I'm hopeful that this is really the beginning of what we can do for other women in competitive sports. And so as I say, no 2 days are the same, but you always look for those opportunities when we can just try to move the needle just a little further along.
That was good. Now I'm having trouble with original thoughts. Yeah, very much, very, very true. The favorite thing about my job, it has to be I work primarily in California, but I also sort of step out and do some stuff in other states and sometimes in DC. And I feel so fortunate to be able to work with, ally with, partner with just incredibly brilliant people who are just so committed and so dedicated to the collective, to the community, less about the I and more about the we, and that is to me the fuel really to stay in this movement and to keep fighting it, and like that is sort of, these are daunting, the stuff that I work with, because it's not just climate, it's water issues, it's public health. They seem very daunting, but every small win feels huge because you know that the impacts are tremendous for thousands or millions of people, and that this is saving lives as well, and protecting the welfare and the well-being of the new generation. So that's an enormous reward, and I feel very, very privileged.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of getting involved at any level. So can each of you provide an example of how women in this room can get involved and stay involved and make a difference? Cora, you've started so many times. I'm going to go over here.
Oops, excuse me. So how many in this room have actually worked on a campaign? Excellent, excellent. There's no shortage of them to work on, right? So I would say that at the very fundamental level, obviously issues that are affecting your very own communities locally are things that are easy to get involved in. But the other thing I would say is, each of you, if you don't view yourself as someone who can actually be a voice for your community, I want you to think twice about that. I oftentimes get asked this question, why should people serve? And, are there people who are serving for the right reasons? And I'd like to think that, particularly in this time that we're in, that if you're not feeling brokenhearted about something, you probably have no business serving. There's a lot of brokenness right now. And as much as I think that all of us who serve in public office are eternal optimists because, that's what fuels us and what keeps us going, there's a purposefulness to serving now. And I don't have a lot of patience for people who can't articulate what they're moved by, what they're affected by, what they hope to deliver. I have to tell you, the presidential election right now is really giving me a lot of frustration because nobody's talking about specific solutions. And it's great that they're swinging left, but frankly, if you can't deliver, it doesn't mean anything. And so I think for all of us, just having that sense that we have something to give. We're in a broken world. Our communities are broken. There are so many people in need. And where we started this conversation, where this is a way to stand up for others. And that means any of you can serve on a local commission. And I hope some of you will think about applying for state commissions. This new governor has a lot of commission slots to fill. And your voices are really important, whether it's a consumer voice on some of the advisory boards, on some of the professional boards. Some of them have specific qualifications. But he is casting the net wide, and I really would encourage you to look on his website to see what might be of interest to you. Then the last thing I would say in terms of getting involved is just really engage people around you, especially our young people. I think that given how we are receiving our news today, looking at what really is moving people to be involved. I was very, very moved by the young people who spoke out on the March for Our Lives movement, because to me that was really the first time in a long time that I saw kind of a passing of the baton, right? These are activists that are going to be around for a long time. A lot of us in this room have been doing this for a long time. And I'm actually really here as an activist. I've been a Democratic activist all my life, so who happens to be a politician now. But this is, I know it's moved me, but whenever I can really involve a young person, which is why I have interns in my office, and just get an inside look at, the impact that you can have. Just even working on, a piece of policy and what you can deliver for communities in California. I think each of us has that responsibility in terms of how we're going to bring up the next generation of leaders and nurture them and encourage them to be involved. And if you can't be involved, just how you can create those opportunities for them to do so.
I started out talking about my experience in South Africa and the motivating force of seeing injustice, and then talking about getting fired up to take on my college as kind of the activation moment. And I saw my path, I saw my role, I saw something I could do that fit into this larger picture. So my advice for people would be figure out what you're pissed off about, what just outrages you or breaks your heart or troubles you, and look for a group of people who are trying to do something about it. I think I know a number of you in this room well enough to know you're already plugged in on multiple levels. Keep doing it. We need you. I think, we talked about the historic number of women getting into office this year. If you look at like Lucy McBath in Florida, she was outraged about her son's death due to gun violence, and she decided, I'm going to get in there and do something about it. Assemblywoman Rebecca Bauer-Cahan in the East Bay was outraged by the Muslim ban, and she's an attorney, and she went to SFO, and she offered pro bono guidance and advice to people there. That's what fired her up, and there she is now in the Assembly. I could go on and on and on with examples like that. Those candidates still need support. The candidates need to be held accountable to the pledges that they made and to delivering on the policies and ideals they hold, but they also need support from the communities who really believe in them and need them to be there. So please continue to do that as well.
Sort of piggybacking off that, I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that you should know your power. Elected officials are literally there to represent you. You vote for them, you put them in office, they are there to represent what you believe in. Find an issue that you're passionate about. Yes, stick with it, absolutely. But don't just focus on the federal level. Make sure you're watching your state and your local, your counties, your municipalities, and making sure that they're actually executing the things that you believe in. They too are your elected representatives, and they are there to serve you. So being involved, knowing your power, knowing how to get in contact with those who make the decisions you're outraged about, I think that's one of the best ways that everybody can be involved.
I definitely second Betty's suggestion that you guys go check out the governor's website page and check out the list of boards and commissions. It's a good way to kind of, there's some of the big ones like coastal and lands and stuff, but it's wide array, and it's a good way to kind of get your foot in the door and your feet wet and get the experience. And that what's inside of you is that courage of conviction, right? That's what's sort of driving you to be here and to want more and to see how it is, what more you can do to build this power. So that's a pretty good way. I appreciate sort of Benicia, and all of the local electeds are here, and you guys are like family, which is awesome. It's like this small town feel. I'm coming from the perspective of Los Angeles, which is so much harder to do that. So I'm always talking to people who feel very, very impotent, and they just sort of like, they're like, whatever, I don't even vote because, the government I'm just trying to get by and keep them out of my way and me out of their way. So I'm always having to do a lot of bridge making, and I think that even here in Benicia, I mean, that's part of the job of an activist, is building those bridges. Sometimes stepping out of the echo chambers and the comfort places, and I suggest if folks want to get more involved in a statewide issues or broader issues than just sort of local issues, that try to get involved in things that may take you out of sort of your region, and maybe you can all go help some campaign or something and further inland or in the rural area, so that you also gain that level of understanding that you can only gain by seeing it and living it with your own eyes, right? And that gives you a broader perspective if you sort of want to get involved at that level. But I think it's pretty scary. I mean, it is scary, and as a mom and as a single mom, I had, it's quite a challenge. I commend you, Kari, for giving and all like that. In a lot of the local positions, oftentimes, I mean, even for the commissions, it's a volunteer thing. It's a lot of work for no pay, but the reward is enormous and the impact is huge. And I think it is definitely worthwhile giving it your time and giving it your best. You have to pick your battles. I mean, all the problems are really overwhelming, and you want to kind of try to shoot at everything. It's going to be pretty exhausting. So I'd say pick those things that really move you in the belly and will get you through the times when you're just like, I'm sick of it, I'm just going to go back to work and forget about this stuff. So pick what moves you and then give it all you got. And I mean, worst case scenario, you're not going to go through the path and become governor at some point, but it's a good experience to have. It opens also your perspective and it helps build community for sure.
Okay, I have one last question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. We've been sitting still for a long time. So what you guys all just shared was very motivational. And originally, my last question for you all was, what's the best piece of motivational advice that you've received? And what would you like to share with this group to motivate us? And we'll start with Susannah.
Well, I have to admit I had a hard time with this one. It's been a long week. No. I think motivation is all around. I was going to talk about a trip I took last week down to Orange County. I think a lot of people know that Orange County really went red to blue big time this last election, and it's due to a lot of hard work from a lot of people. I knew going down there that I think it's $3 million of outside money went into that county for the midterm elections, and I went down there wanting to know, okay, is this going to happen again? Is this for real? Is this sustained? Is it coming from the ground up, or was it more, piloting in? And so for me, that trip was so much motivation because the people I met with are absolutely from the ground up, grassroots, committed, diverse, young, old, all over the place. I met with Betty Valencia, who ran for the Orange City Council, a city that's about half Latino, but has had hardly any, if even one, Latino representative at the city level of government. She is pushing the boundaries of that as a queer Latina woman, committed Catholic, incredibly inspirational speaker. She's not on the city council yet, but hopefully she will be very soon. And talking with her and meeting with other candidates who have thrown in their hat to challenge Republican office holders. I met with a group called WAVE, called Women for American Values and Ethics. It's a bipartisan group that literally the way it started. Joanna Weiss, who founded it, took note of every one of her friends who posted on Facebook in the aftermath of the 2016 election with outrage, and then sent a message to them all a couple days later saying, I noticed you're upset, let's get together and figure out what we're gonna do. And at this point, they have a super PAC, a regular PAC, a 501c4, a C3 wing that does legal advocacy. It's crazy. And these are, this is an affluent suburban community in mostly southern Orange County. So across that spectrum and many more, that trip motivated me to really believe that we are building something here, and it's diverse and across very wide swaths, and it has some momentum to sustain the wave that we saw last year into something more extended, which I think in many ways is what we're all fighting to get to.
The biggest piece of motivational advice I can share. After the last election, motivation was low in the office, and we had a staff conference call with my boss, Congressman Thompson, and he kind of just gave us a little pep talk and tried to deliver the message that we're still in this. The federal government is like a tanker ship. It's not going to turn on a dime. Things are slow. Progress is steady, and if we continue fighting and engaging, we're going to be able to push back and maybe move the needle a little bit. And to me, that was one of the main motivations for sticking with it. Even if things look dire, even if you think the situation is catastrophic, there's still work to be done. We represent 5 counties in California. Benicia is just on the southern tip of our district. We represent Napa and Sonoma and Lake counties, which I'm sure you all know have experienced just devastating wildfires these past couple of years. And so seeing my colleagues kind of join arms and just work, back to back, day after day, working with constituents, making sure they have a place to go, making sure they have access to the emergency information they need. Seeing my boss, he's a U.S. congressman. He's not a farmhand. He's not a cook. But there he was, at the fairgrounds, helping out, doing everything that he could, just because that's where he wanted to be. He wanted to be there to help people who were affected by tragedy. And I think that's a real powerful motivation to have when you're facing such devastating circumstances, be it political or environmental or just the situation around you. Being involved for the right reasons and sticking with it is my motivation.
So, when I saw that question, I kept on thinking about my grandma, who in her very silent way would always just drop this hints, and they're proverbs in Spanish, and it's always hard kind of for me to translate them, start chopping them up and then mix them in. But because sort of our journey was always challenging, and there was a lot of hardship, and she was just, it wasn't sort of just the words, but it was the comfort of her words of these challenges are only going to make you stronger, and they're only going to make you more courageous. And my mentors, all the female mentors that I've had, that's what they just said. They're always in my head. They always say this. This is why I think it's so important. So what I'm getting to is it's important for you guys to have those people in your life, and for you guys to be that person for somebody in their lives who you can just say, you got this, girl, you know your stuff, you got this. You have a good heart, and whatever your decision, you have to trust your decisions. And in a lot of these challenges, especially when you face so much opposition, that sometimes you're just like, am I the wrong person here? And it's sometimes you can doubt yourself, right? Because it's also stuff that impacts so many people. But when you have sort of that at the core, at the heart, and those people around you who are just there giving you those little pushes and uplifting you like that, I think that's one of the reasons why we're here.
I think at the grand level, I think about how lucky we are to be here in California, and how every day we get to wake up and we truly embrace diversity as our greatest strength and not a threat. And how really what happens here in California, and I know many of us in this room travel, and how we get a lot of compliments, although traveling abroad, it's kind of like, what's up with your guy in the White House? But certainly around this nation, there's just a lot of hope about what happens in California because we are really seen as the leader. And I think that certainly continues to motivate me in terms of doing our best to really make California shine with all of the challenges that we have. And having traveled this state extensively, what I'm motivated by is the fact that, and many of you will remember, there was almost a measure on the ballot to split California into 3 states. And I believe to my core that every issue that we are facing, whether it's poverty, whether it's climate change, the effects of climate change, whether it's looking at how we deal with all kinds of equity issues, we can solve all of that within California. We have these diverse regions of California. We have diverse perspectives, but at the end of the day, there's an ethic and a value system about California that we share in common with so many other parts of the state. And I believe that as a leading state, that our role as a government is to figure out how to connect the different regions together and really begin to really grow our own prosperity, create our own opportunities. And I have to say that my motivation right now is my mother, who's 95 years old. The roles are now reversed where I'm a caregiver for her as one of 6 siblings. She's recovering from a viral infection in her brain. And 24-hour care, she's not able to swallow. When you look at someone like her, an immigrant from China who has seen so much over the course of her 95 years, I have nothing to complain about. I have nothing to complain about. But I look at what else I can do in terms of, she had hardships, she made sacrifices, and it's the least that I can do to be sure that, we are putting California back on solid footing. But out of her, just the experience with her, one of the things I hope to accomplish, and this is something that we're ill-prepared to deal with, but our aging population here in California. And when you look at where we are with the caring professions here in California, it's abysmal, and frankly, not the best value statement to say that those to whom we entrust our loved ones, whether it be our children, our loved ones with special needs, our elders, we don't value that work enough. And so, as my mother would say, be intentional with everything you do, and there are no do-overs. And so I hope with all of your help, and this is something I really care a lot about, one of the very first bills I staffed as a young legislative staffer back in the 80s was to require every home care worker to be paid at least a minimum wage and receive health care. And we're still fighting that fight. But more importantly, out of the experience of caring for my mother, we have to be sure that our caregivers get the tools that they need. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be deploying our technological innovations, robotics, all the tools of how we provide for quality of service and certainly the ultimate outcome, quality of life for our loved ones. And so I hope to elevate this conversation to where when we talk about how we're going to deal with our aging population, that it is about really elevating the value of the care that's being provided, pay those caregivers more, and hopefully create an economic ladder for so many who are in those professions, particularly women and people of color.
This question is very near and dear to my heart. The question is, running for office, how do you deal with your community that doesn't always have the same perspective as you do? And how do you stay friends when they put someone else's sign in their yard?
Okay. Well, congratulations on surviving and knowing people. I think it's a very real dynamic, and I think probably everyone in here is close to someone who has different views and knows that, particularly since November of 2016, just the stakes have gone a lot higher and connections have been broken. I think the most core thing for you is probably that you know your community and your community knows you. You can be yourself. You can listen and take in input. You can focus on issues that are local. I think, a lot of voters and the public's dissatisfaction and outrage with, all the partisanship and the infighting and the polarization that we see right now is because we're not talking about actual issues. We're talking about assumptions and, myths and, I won't even go on. But, I think Danica Rome, who won in the state legislative race in Virginia as the first out trans representative at a state legislative level, won on traffic issues. She talked about this one intersection or this one highway in Virginia where people had been hurt for years and years and years. Her opponent tried to make it about sexual identity, and it was about the local issues. So, I think particularly in this environment, that's a winning strategy.
So one of the things I think it's very easy to do just in life is to just always associate yourself with people that you're comfortable with. And I think one of the, I would have to say one of the most rewarding things that I've done in politics is to try to spend more time with people who are different from me. Really one, to understand where they're coming from, but two, it's always a little bit of a challenge when I put myself in these situations to see if there's an opportunity to come out of it, at least agreeing on just what the issues are, and maybe there's a difference of opinion about how we're going to resolve them. And more times than not, it's actually a good outcome. And obviously there are many times where we agree to disagree. But I think part of the reason I do that, and it's actually becoming more and more the reason why I do this, and I do it a lot, is because in doing so, you really do elevate the tenor of the discourse that you can have with people who have divergent views. And I think that's another kind of ill effect of what's happened since 2016. We just can't even have a conversation. And unfortunately, in my family, I have a relative, a sibling, that I can no longer have a conversation with. So the family dynamic is much more difficult than going into a community where I know there are going to be divergent views. But we all, at the end of the day, and I believe this because I've witnessed it, we share a lot of similar hopes and aspirations. We have similar aspirations for our children and grandchildren. I think sometimes what we call things, climate change is a nuclear word in so many parts of California still. But when we talk about what it means in terms of having clean water and safe air to breathe, and what it means for our children, I think that's a different type of conversation. So, but I would really encourage each of us to just kind of get out of our comfort zone. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be successful if we can actually let those who have divergent views know that we share many of their concerns. And frankly, we're in a better position to elect people who are going to pay attention to their concerns. And I think we'll be successful in this next round.
Well, the one way you're not going to change people's minds or sort of bridge that divide is by adding more fuel to the fire, right? So I think that all of this needs to be fought with a lot of love, and some understanding, right? So that, because if you become very confrontational and, just as hostile and just kind of using the same level of rhetoric, I mean, the divide just gets bigger and bigger. But it's much harder for people to keep, escalating in their anger and their resentment when they see that, you're a kind person and you're a good person in your heart. And eventually, slowly, I mean, it's hard to change minds like that, especially when all of these kind of biases and things are so entrenched. But in my experience, it was a woman of color, as an immigrant, you know, and as somebody who moves up and down the state quite a bit and runs into all kinds of folks, I think it's much harder for people to sort of hold very strict to those beliefs when they're in front of me, once they've gotten to know me, right? Because they also, you know, start sort of getting that instinct of some respect and some humanity within them and that kind of connection. So it has to be done with love. It's the path of most resistance, but I think ultimately that's what's going to be able to get us in a better place.
If I can quickly, I'm going to pull from both of these lovely ladies. First, you absolutely need to have empathy from where they're coming from. We can't always assume that they're coming from a place of hate, but maybe a place of misinformation, a place of believing in a myth. And killing them with kindness is the best way to do it. And due to the nature of my job, I talk to people with all different sorts of beliefs. And my usual go-to is to ask them, who do you know who has experienced that? So if they're going to spout a conspiracy theory that illegal aliens get free medical health care from the US government and we don't care about our citizens, say, oh, who do you know who's had that experience? And have them kind of answer their own question. The other thing is to follow through. Don't operate under a party name. Don't run on a party platform. Follow through on what you say you're going to do. If you talk to a constituent who's upset about a pothole in their street and you tell them you're going to do something about it, maybe show up at their door a couple days later with the report from the city that says, oh, I notified the city, you know, about the pothole in your street, and, you know, theoretically someone should follow through with that. But yeah, follow through on what you say you're going to do, and don't just operate on ideals. Get to know the local issues.
Do we have any other questions? Any other raised hands? Okay, seeing no one come forward, I want to thank our wonderful panelists this evening. I sure have learned a lot, and I hope you have too. And I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. What a beautiful audience. Thanks for sitting still for so long. We'll have this room until 9 o'clock, and there's food and beverages available. And then, of course, our panelists will be around to chat. So thanks again for coming out and supporting the Progressive Democrats of Benicia. Good night.